I've pulled out the old Singer Featherweight. Won't you join me today as I make some festive placemats? I am so glad you decided to join me again for another Unwinding with Fiber and Fabric. I am so excited to bring this placemat project to you. I went down memory lane. I decided to go old school. I decided to pull out my second oldest sewing machine and stitch together these placemats this week. It's been around 25 years since I first made placemats, and I've learned a great deal. Years ago, when I first embarked on making placemats with my quilting scraps, I was younger. I did not know nearly as much as I do today on the techniques and the fabrics and the instruments that I needed. I didn't know that using 80% cotton, 20% polyester batting is a much easier product to quilt through and have a flat placemat. So my first placemats, made for my mother-in-law with her help in purchasing the materials, are a little bit on the lumpier side because I didn't pre-wash my fabrics back then, and I used polyester batting, and when the placemats got thrown in the wash, everything's scrunched up and they look adorable, but they're not really the heirloom I was expecting them to be. The tip I had back then that I knew would really help is taking panels. We found some Christmas cats that were about the right size for a placemat, and I cut out the panel and I sandwiched it together and I sat down and hand quilted around the outlines of the cats. I so recommend panels for people who are trying to learn how to hand quilt. There's no seams, there's no bulk in the way, and you can just practice following the outlines. It's almost as easy as coloring, except of course there's a needle and thread and all of the things that go along with it. And that's how I practiced, that's how I learned. And I've learned so much since then. Now I pre-wash all my fabrics because although I do like my quilts to get a little crinkly when they're washed, I leave it up to the batting to do the crinkling, not the fabric. I have had fabrics bleed. I've had good fabrics bought from really high-end quilting stores bleed. So I now put everything through a wash, take the time to repress, and then I make my quilts. But this project is actually one that is good to use scraps and remnants with. In block sizes like this, it's easy to use leftovers. Although the panel in the center is Snoopy fabric that I purchased a few years ago for my daughter, all the rest of the blocks are cut out of scraps. One of the things that I do now when I get done with a quilting project is I take anything that is less than 1/4 yard, actually most of the time now, anything that's less than a yard, I will go ahead and cut down into squares. It's easier. I have accumulated a lot of yardage, and anything that is too small doesn't fold up well in my stash. So instead of having it get lost, I simply cut it down. I cut it down to I start usually with 6-inch squares, 6.5-inch squares, 4.5-inch squares, 3.5-inch squares, 2.5-inch squares, and even little 2-inch squares that I have a project that I'll probably show later how to use in a future video. So I go through and I cut all my remnants down into scraps, and it's easy. I now just go to the bin. I needed 3.5-inch pieces for this, and I went and I found 3.5-inch pieces that go around the 6.5-inch block that was in the center. Pretty simple. So this has been a kind of a walk down memory lane, pulling out the old sewing machine, the machine that my children bought for me a few years ago because they knew that I couldn't lug my heavy computerized sewing machine around with me. The doctor has said I'm supposed to limit the amount that I carry, and every other machine I have is too heavy. So they bought me a 1939 Singer featherweight sewing machine, and it goes into a little rolling case, and even with all of the scissors and pins and a rotary cutter and a mat, even with all of that, I can take that to my projects. It still weighs under. But this project that I bring to you today, it goes back to the idea of doing things from a beginner's perspective, going back to the basics. When I started, it was really too expensive for me to initially get the cutting mats and rulers, and so I tried to make do. I have some very wonky projects from those days. They are loved, but there were no matching points. Little by little, I built up my supplies of quilting essentials. I would get them for birthdays, Mother's Day, Christmases, the rulers, the cutting mats that I needed. I remember the days in which just buying a ruler was stretching our budget. And so, over the years, I have put together patterns that can be done by beginners without all of those tools. They're wonderful tools. I highly recommend them if they are something you can afford. But I don't want quilting to be something that is restrictive. The oldest sewing machine I have in my home is I think I looked up the date, and it's the early 1900s white treadle machine that was my great-grandmother's. And when I inherited that, it actually had template pieces from projects she had made, from quilts that she had made. She'd cut her templates out of scrap pieces of leather so that they held up so that she could draw around them. The quilts that my grandmother made were made with yardsticks and pencil lines drawing the squares. So I come from a background of basic quilts, basic square piecing, and I think there's value in that. I think that for beginners, sometimes that rotary cutter can really be frightful. It's a tool that has to be learned how to use without damaging yourself or your fabric. And so it was with that in mind that I came up with this set of patterns that can be used with simple square templates. I have all of these patterns put together in a PDF that I'll talk about later. But I come today with this notion of practicing using these simple squares, simple blocks, going back old school, going back to a simple sewing machine, a simple straight stitch, and simple scissor cut blocks. Of course, these can be done with rotary cutters and rulers and mats, but I challenge you. Think about going old school and see if it doesn't give you a different perspective. Even the batting from these is pieced together. Sometimes it's nice to just be a little more simple in the things that we do and try. When it's chaotic and stressful, simple can ease our stress, ease the anxiety. I hope you'll stick around to the end to hear more about the other patterns that I have available for free for beginners and experts alike to try. Pull out those scraps. Pull out those fun festive fabrics. Make yourself some placemats and see if going old school is something that gives you pleasure this time of year. I'll see you again in a few moments with more information. Wasn't that a fun and simple project? I have been having a blast making a stack of these placemats for my daughter. All that's left is some hand quilting, which I hope to have done before Thanksgiving. If you go to my blog, and I'll include a link below, I will have there a set of patterns, very simple, some a little more complicated, but most of them very, very beginning level quilting. I'll have a set of these patterns available in PDF form for you to download. They are free. I hope that you will have fun making these, and I hope that you will get in touch if you have tried them and enjoyed them. In addition to the ones that I have shown you, we have some half square triangles, very simple checkerboard. Ignore the cats behind me. They seem to be a little spunky this morning on this crisp, cool morning. The simple 9-patch, the perfect block to start with. And then a bit of a pinwheel. All of these simple patterns will be available in the PDF that I have in my blog. One of the things that I recommend if you are truly a beginner quilter is to not be so worried about if all your points match up. Getting a point to match up like this takes some practice. It is doable. It's just a matter of accuracy, some good pressing, and sometimes just a little bit of luck. But if you're really truly a new beginner and you don't have any of the rotary cutters and rulers and mats, don't be put off by this. Don't feel like you have to run out and spend a bunch of money on tools and gadgets. These patterns can all be done with templates and with scissors and the old school, like my grandmother and great-grandmother used to do. Draw around the template, stitch them together. You can even stitch them together by hand if you don't have a sewing machine. Simple sewing machine, straight stitch. If you don't have a 1/4 inch seam allowance foot yet for your sewing machine, it is a very, very useful tool, but you can always measure out where 1/4 inch is away from the needle, put down a piece of tape and use it as a guide. Additionally, for simple blocks like the 9-patch, just using the edge of your sewing foot, any sewing foot, and being very, very consistent in how you sew your seams, you will still have luck in getting those points to match up. It is going to reduce each block by the same amount because you're using the same amount of seam allowance. And because of that, it's a great way for a beginner to get some confidence on the machine, to get the feel of how it works. Just use the edge of your foot. But if you can get a 1/4 inch seam allowance foot, oh, it can be a game changer. Accuracy is the most important piece to sewing quilt blocks. And that takes practice. And until you have that accuracy, until that practice is in place, don't worry if the points get cut off. My early quilts have points cut off all over the place. And they still look fabulous, and I still love them, and they are still been cherished by the people in my family that have received them. So I think I'll leave it here for this week. I hope that you will give this a try. I'm going to go see what my cat is attacking behind me, and I hope to see you again soon. I'm now thinking, have I forgot anything? If I have, shoot me a question in the comments. I'll try to fill in an answer. Otherwise, have a happy and wonderful harvest season as you make placemats for your table. Enjoy.